It gives me great pleasure to welcome everyone to this call today. To begin today, we would like to acknowledge the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. We also further recognize that Laurentian University and Science North are located on the traditional lands of the Atikameksheng, Anishinaabeg, and that the greater city of Sudbury also includes the traditional lands of the Wahnapitae First Nation. It is my great honor to now invite Elder Neil Maneg to open today's session with a prayer and song. Miigwech, Neil.
Oh. As soon as I get the lit up here. Oh, hello?
Yeah, we hear you, Neil. We just don't see you.
I have a white screen here now.
So if you go up in the top right-hand corner with those little buttons, you can start your video.
I only got the word Zoom on my screen.
Okie doke. So
I can't see anybody.
That's okay. We can still hear you. So,
okay. All right.
So we can't hear you. Miigwech, Neil, for that beautiful song. I guess what I haven't done yet is introduce myself. I'm Shelley Moore-Frappier, and I'm the interim associate vice president for academic and Indigenous programs at Laurentian University. And so thank you for starting us off with that beautiful song, Neil. What a wonderful way to begin today's seminar. This is the fourth of our 6-part seminar series. Welcome to those who have joined us today for this engaging topic. Despite the challenges we are all facing, isn't it incredible how technology has brought us together in a way that we would not have imagined? As the interim associate vice president, academic and Indigenous programs, I have seen firsthand the engagement and willingness of our exceptionally talented researchers to support the fight against COVID-19. I am also excited to be working alongside our neighbors and exceptional science communicators from Science North. This partnership has already proven to be successful in jointly presenting the seminar series to over 2,500 people to date. I would like to now introduce Emily Curtin to you. Emily is a senior scientist at Science North, and she will help facilitate and guide us through the next hour.
Miigwech, Shelley. Miigwech, Elder Maneg for the song. Hello, Bojo, Ani, Wache, Emily Curtin, Indigenous. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today and tuning in from so many different places. I'm joining into this conversation from the traditional and ancestral lands of the Ojibways of Fort William First Nation. I'm sitting on the shores of the Anishinaabe-Gitchigami under the views of Nanabojo in the Robinson Superior Treaty. On behalf of Science North, I would like to thank Laurentian University for this partnership, as these seminars have been incredibly informative and have created dialogue on issues that many of us are curious about, but don't often have the opportunity to engage with. And personally, as a non-Indigenous, privileged Northern Ontarian, I'm humbled to be moderating such an incredible panel, and I'm very much looking forward to having the opportunity to learn from them on this important topic of how COVID-19 is impacting First Nations communities. Just a couple of housekeeping items for those who are watching from home. I will introduce each of the panelists, and they will have about 5 minutes to share their insights. At any time, you can type your questions into the comments section in English ou en français. We will try to answer as many as we can following the presentations. And with that, I'm very honored to introduce our first panelist, Robin Rowe, who is a sessional professor in the School of Indigenous Relations at Laurentian University. Go ahead, Robin.
Miigwech, Shelley, H. Neil, and Emily for that beautiful introduction, song, and land acknowledgement. Ani Bojo Kwekwe, Robin Rowe, Indigenous. Hello, everyone. My name is Robin Rowe, and I am a member of Matachewan First Nation. However, my familial roots are on Bear Island, Temagami First Nation. And I am a research associate and a PhD candidate in the School of Rural and Northern Health at Laurentian University, as well as a sessional professor. My research areas of interest are specifically around Indigenous data sovereignty globally, and on a national level, I focus on First Nations data sovereignty and governance. In my role as a research associate, I work with Dr. Walker and Dr. Wabi. We're also guided by Elder H. Neil, and we respond to the needs and priorities of our First Nations community partners as we all work together to find ways to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. As an emerging First Nations researcher in Indigenous health, I am incredibly aware of the importance of First Nations control over First Nations data. In this age of digitization, data on First Nations, including data on our lands, environments, peoples, and nations, are more available and accessible than ever before, and that includes our data on our COVID-related data. When it comes to health information and the impacts of data on health, First Nations communities and organizations across the province are showing their awareness of data's ability to impact decision-making, influence health policy, leverage funding, and ultimately improve health outcomes. First Nations are advancing their sovereignty as demonstrated by the First Nations principles of OCAP, which means ownership, control, access, and possession. The OCAP principles lay the foundation for sovereignty, and through these governing principles, First Nations are highlighting that advancing self-determination and autonomy begins through respectful research processes that honor the inherent rights of First Nations to own, protect, and access data on First Nations peoples, lands, environments, and nations. And due to geographic isolation, location, challenging socioeconomic conditions, limited economic opportunities, and a lack of emergency management plans, many First Nations communities across the province and in Canada are already experiencing, before COVID, emergencies more often. Pandemic response measures are being implemented by individual First Nations leadership who are informed that there is a greater chance of more severe and more negative outcomes as a result and associated with COVID-19 due to these unique circumstances. And these circumstances already increase the transmission and reproduction of COVID for First Nations communities. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, First Nations communities across the province have been enacting their right to self-determination through various and sometimes innovative measures aimed at limiting the spread of the virus and reducing negative outcomes in our communities while ensuring that community members continue to feel connected. Through measures aimed at preparing, preventing, responding to, and recovering from this global epidemic, the First Nations, the 133 recognized First Nations communities in Ontario are developing emergency plans and implementing ways to prevent tragedies. Collectively, community responses have included border closures and control, the creation of community testing sites and isolation facilities. At a grassroots level, interventions have included things such as food banks, community volunteer groups, mask-making initiatives, and virtual wellness programs. First Nations communities are doing more than just protecting their people. In many respects, First Nations are protecting their oral histories and their stories, which are often in the care of the oldest and sometimes the most vulnerable of our communities. As a First Nations health researcher, I am aware that First Nations are vulnerable to pandemics because of challenges associated with socioeconomic and environmental factors that are often rooted in colonial histories, colonial practices, and colonial policies. But as a First Nations woman, I am aware of this because of my knowledge of a long history of colonialism and the dramatic loss of life resulting from past pandemics, including things such as smallpox and influenza, measles, and now this novel coronavirus. Systemically rooted colonial policies and action plans have created environments where the COVID-19 pandemic is spawning debate and discussion over who has the right to decide on the health and well-being of First Nations in a time of COVID. As an advocate for First Nations data sovereignty and data governance, I want to reinforce that First Nations have the inherent right to assert their sovereignty in a time of COVID by implementing pandemic response measures that are aimed at keeping First Nations peoples, families, and communities safe. So thank you so much for inviting me to this talk today, and I really look forward to the questions. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Robin. For those of you who are just joining us now, we're discussing the impact of COVID-19 on First Nations communities. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments, and we'll try to answer them all following the presentations of the panelists. I'd now like to welcome our next panelist, Joey Lynn Wabi, Assistant Professor in the School of Indigenous Relations at Laurentian University. Go ahead, Joey. Joey, you're still on mute.
All right, I got it this time. Kwekwe, Ziguanque Indigenous, Tiktodem, Wolf Lake First Nation and Dunjaba, Algonquin Anishinaabe, Kwe, and Dao. So I just introduced myself. My name is Joey Lynn Wabi. I am Caribou Clan, and I am from Wolf Lake First Nation in northwestern Quebec, and I am Algonquin and Anishinaabe woman. So today I'm going to talk just a little bit about COVID-19, more so on the vibrancy and resilience of First Nation communities. As Robin had mentioned, we are doing some research with older adults and COVID with Dr. Walker and H. Neil Manag and Robin. So this idea of land, when I was thinking about that, so my area of research first is in the area of spiritual health, Indigenous women and youth, and grassroots community. And so when I think about the COVID-19 and the physical distancing policies that were put in place and the shutdown measures that occurred, when I think of those things, I think of the sovereignty of each First Nation community, and the way that they were able to, not control, but I guess do control their First Nation. So some went into shutdown, some did, half and half. They had checkpoints. All of those different things were part of that act of sovereignty for them to be able to choose what they want to do with their own people, by their people, and for their people. So I think that sent a really strong message to the land that we now call Canada, and to say that we can be in control of our own health. We don't need other people to tell us always what to do. We're able to do this for ourselves. And I think that the First Nation communities all across Turtle Island, the upper part of Turtle Island, and of course down into the States and Mexico for the rest of the Turtle, all have a really good hand and idea of what they want for their own health. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. Another part of that is this idea of like the importance of land during COVID, right? So this idea that the importance of land is about land, and it's not about money. It's not about all of these different things. It's about land, and that as a resource, and not dollars and cents and all of those things. And I really think that that's a very strong message also that First Nation communities have sent, is that this idea is that we have control and sovereignty over our pieces of land that we do have, and we can exercise our rights the way that we want to and need to in order to keep our people safe. And when I think about keeping people safe and keeping elders safe and older adults, it's really important, because those people are our storytellers, right? Those are the ones that hold the knowledge from past generations, because we are an intergenerational storytelling type of people. When I think about that, I think about all of those things that are lost, and we need to be protecting our elders and older adults, and of course our people that are compromised with immune systems and babies. But I really also want to stress the importance too of when elders pass on and we don't get to acknowledge or hear their stories, then we don't, all of that can be lost, and that's what we don't want. So I think of that. I think of that with the physical distancing, the land piece, the sovereign communities, and also the ceremonies. Ceremonies that we have are very relational, right? They're very connected. So we also need to have time to be able to do that in a safe way. And I think that's part of the work that we're going to be doing together. So, miigwech.
Miigwech, Joey. Our next panelist is Jennifer Walker, the Canada Research Chair for Indigenous Health at Laurentian University. Go ahead, Jen.
Sego, hi, I'm Jennifer Walker. So yes, I'm a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Health. I live and work in Sudbury, but my family is from Southern Ontario, from Six Nations, so Haudenosaunee. And so the work that I do and the connections that of my work to the impact of COVID-19 on First Nations people and communities has really centered around my role as an epidemiologist. So probably a year ago, if I said I was an epidemiologist, many people would, my experience is that most people would think I did something related to skin or have some kind of questions about what epidemiology is. But my sense is that now that's a little more, if ever there's been a time to be an epidemiologist and people understand what that is, it's probably now. But realistically, most of the work that I've done up to now has been, around health services research, looking at chronic disease and supporting First Nations to access data about access healthcare data about their populations and communities, to be able to answer questions and drive policy and decision making for their communities. So really those ideas that Robin was touching on around Indigenous data sovereignty, and many of the things that Joey Lynn was touching on in terms of, First Nation communities and people making decisions that support self-determination. So when COVID-19 emerged, a lot of my focus shifted to making sure that the data about the pandemic and about what was happening in First Nation communities that has been being collected about First Nations people was available to First Nations leadership to be able to make decisions. So what we've been doing for about 7 weeks now in Ontario is accessing the laboratory data for all of Ontario, and providing First Nations leadership at the Ontario level with a weekly report on the number of First Nations people who have been tested for COVID-19 and the number of people who have tested positive. And that has been a really impactful and important thing to be sharing with leadership, because we've seen, a bit of a spike and then a drop and then a dip and then an up. So just to monitor on a weekly basis what's happening both in First Nation communities and overall for First Nations in Ontario. And I think one of the other important things that this has been able to open up is just an awareness of how accessible testing, COVID-19 testing, has been for community members living in First Nation communities particularly. There seems to be a bit of a greater access to testing if people live outside of their First Nation communities. But overall, what this has been helpful to show is just how effective actually First Nations have been at managing to keep COVID-19 mostly out of their communities. There's about 111 cases so far of COVID-19 positivity in First Nations people in Ontario. And about 2/3 of those are outside of First Nation communities, and 1/3 inside First Nation communities. The other activity that we've been really actively involved in is modeling. So modeling the potential impacts of COVID-19, and this has put both at a sort of regional level, so Ontario regional level, but also at a very community level, information in the hands of First Nations to say, if we don't manage to keep COVID-19 out of our communities, as soon as there's a case, what do we need to be mobilized to prepare to do? What do we need to understand about the transmission? And a lot of a lot of the contribution to that modeling work and that sort of looking at what the potential impacts of COVID-19 could be in communities relies on past experience with H1N1. And in those experiences, there were much higher hospitalization rates. There was, there's a lot of still trauma related to the sort of response and the impact of H1N1 in First Nation communities. And so looking at what happened in past pandemics and informing future pandemics, we know that the likelihood of transmission is higher because of more crowded and higher density in terms of the number of people per household and the sort of interactions that people have on a day-to-day basis. So higher likelihood of transmission in First Nation communities and also in cities for First Nations people living in cities, because people are sometimes living in sort of more marginalized conditions where there is crowding. And then there's in some communities access to safe water for cleaning and for managing the spread of infectious diseases is also limited. So we expect that there would be higher transmission in First Nation communities and First Nation populations. We also expect that there would be greater severity of COVID-19 when COVID-19 hits in communities, because there's a higher baseline rate of comorbid conditions, so existing conditions, so higher number of people are more likely to have diabetes or hypertension, which impact the severity of COVID-19 and make it more likely that people have to go to the hospital, people have to be on ventilators, and those kinds of things. So, so taking all of that into account, producing these models for communities has been helpful in terms of putting data in the hands of decision makers so that they can really assert sovereignty and manage the pandemic for their communities. Thank you very much. It was really nice to be able to share this, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Great, Jen. Just a quick reminder to those of you who are watching that you can write your questions into the comments, and following our last panelist, we will try to answer as many as we can. So we have one final panelist who I'd like to invite back onto the screen, Elder H. Neil Maneg. Please turn on your camera and come back on.
Good morning. Hi, I'm a Chichok, and my AKA name is H. Neil Maneg, and I'm from Christian Island. And we talk about this COVID-19, which I'm, it's for us here in the community, we're kind of in a lockdown. Our border at the mainland side is being monitored by one of our people here, and making sure that everybody is going to be safe here on the islands. So far, we've been lucky, and knock on wood. And it's it's a very difficult situation. In my entire life, I never really thought I would be sitting in a position where this disease is running rampant across North America and around the world. You only hear about these things from the past, about the Spanish flu and all that other stuff, and then all of a sudden this shows up, and I am fearful. I fear for my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren, and it's something that needs to be, we need to follow those directives, and that's the mask and social distancing, physical social distancing. For us here, again, like I said, we're lucky. But again, it's like anywhere else. It's everybody gathers in one spot with no mask and nothing like that. And for me, I wear my mask when I go, and everybody looks at me when I come into maybe the band office or the island store with the mask on, and they wonder probably, But I don't think they're laughing. But again, it's in our culture, we talk about all those things, and we talk about those things, that how we take care of ourselves. And I remember a long time ago when I was growing up, I could hear stories about what happened here. I believe it had to be that Spanish flu that went through, and a lot of our people passed away here, and they couldn't do funeral per se. But they just had to dig a mass grave, and but nobody seems to understand that story these days, or they forgot about it, or it's something that we need to talk about here in our community, and how we have to take care of ourselves. And in those teachings, they talk a lot about the diseases, and they talk a lot about fire. They talk a lot about water, and I remember one of the stories, and one of the things, that there is still one more thing to come, and I'm not sure what it is yet. I have to talk. A lot of our elders have passed here, and again, those are the things I guess we should ask them what that was. And I have an idea, but again, I don't want to tell everybody what that idea is, and I don't want to scare you. But the thing is that we need to talk to those elders, and we need to know exactly how to take care of ourselves again, because right now, some of us can do it, but a lot of the community members can't. They kind of live in that world of modern technology. You see people walking down the road with their phones on, looking at their screens, and all this other stuff, and Facebooking. Well, I do Facebooking too, but I play games on it, so because I live alone. So those teachings, we need to go back. Maybe some of us have to maybe talk to them, but again, some people don't want to listen to us anymore because of the way life is these days. It's more technological, and we forget about those medicines. And a lot of us who still remember the medicines and how to use them, when to use them, when and how is something that needs to be retaught. And there are some of us who still do it. And when when people come and talk to me about certain things, or they call me on the phone and they ask me to do this type of work for them from home, I usually do a smudge, a prayer, and I'd sing a song for them. And but here in my community, I do it automatically. I pray for the people here. I try to do the best I can. And again, I'm alone, I think. I don't know who else is doing this besides me. And but again, like I said, when we were in that lockdown, when we started the lockdown, it was kind of surprising that we were down to 4 runs a day out of 10. And then people started complaining, and people weren't really listening. And but finally, I'm hoping that they do listen, because right now the way I see things, it's that they opened up too early. I believe they opened up too early, and I think they should actually close down for a while till the end of June or mid-July, because the numbers are climbing. Apparently, from what I hear and understand, is that those numbers are climbing again. And somebody asked me about what happens if they open the borders. And I said, well, good luck to us, I said. Because if they open those borders, we're in big trouble, per se. And so I'm thinking from the other side. I'm thinking from knowing how I grew up and what to do to protect myself or protect my family as best I can. And what to do, how to store things is basically something that I was told growing up. And I remember those things. I remember them very much. And when this pandemic broke out and we went into lockdown, I had to start thinking on how I was going to look after myself. How was I going to look after my daughters? And I keep telling them, I keep reassuring them and letting them know that you need to stay away from each other. But they're young people. And this is where the problem is. And young people today, and I want to say this, and even in my community, they don't listen to us old folks. That's one thing that I get angry with that. And we know what's going on. We know how to live. But the younger ones don't seem to understand the meaning of social distancing or masks, or they party. And then the question I have, if this should break out here, and God forbid it happens, I'm going to ask that question: who are you going to be mad at? Who do we get mad? Who do we get angry with? And I think that when Joey talked about the elders, and we need to go back to the elders and ask them questions, and they're the ones that have the answers. I know they do, because when I talk about the elders, and they're sleeping, even though they're alive, they're sitting there watching, and nobody talks to them. And then suddenly they pass on into that spirit realm. They go home to the Creator. And with them goes that teaching, that understanding. Because in our way of thinking is that it's a life learning. It's a life path. And it's a forever life. We can walk upon the earth in human form, but when we're done, we walk in Creator's world in spirit. So our lives will never end. It'll continue. So again, like I say, it's for me, it's a very difficult thing to try to understand why people don't listen, why people don't follow direction. Wear a mask to help with that. And then when I go to town, I'm fearful when I go to town. I've only been to town maybe 4 times in the last 4 months. And it's very difficult for me because I live alone, like I said. I don't get visitors. Even before this pandemic broke out, I never had visitors. My daughters would come, and once a month or once every other month, and my grandchildren pop in once in a while. But again, I like being alone too. So anyway, I hope I talked a little bit about what we're going through here, and because it's difficult. And I should add, they also bring us food packages every 2 weeks. So we're good so far. And I'm hoping that we continue on that good path, and hopefully that this virus is slows down and stops because it's a different world we live in. And remember, Creator gave us those things that we need, and the power of prayer. I believe in that, and that's one thing that I do probably once a week, maybe twice a week when I'm asked, or sometimes 3 times a week, because people do ask me to pray and sing and smudge for them. Anyway, that's about all I have, and miigwech, everyone.
Miigwech, H. Neil. That was really, really great to hear. We're going to move into the question period now. So I'll ask all the panelists to turn on their videos. And during these incredible presentations, we've had several questions come in. So the first one came in from someone on Facebook asking, how can we engage youth to seek out guidance from elders? This might be a good question for Neil.
Me? I think I'm not sure exactly how we can do that, because again, like I said, modern technology has taken over, and we need to try to reassure them that there's more to modern technology because of who we are. Yeah, we're a people that we're First Nations people. Our customs are land based. Our customs are creation, and some of them do understand it, but some of them don't want to ask the question. So I'm kind of lost for words on that one. But if we do engage them, we'd have to try and use, talk to them if we can. But again, they just kind of laugh at me because they do ask me questions and I do answer them. And I said, you need to really look at yourself before you can step outside and make sure that what you do out there is within the normal practice of who you are. Because each one of us is different, our individuality. And when we look at that and understand it, then we begin to see, because young people do ask me how to smudge. Young people do ask me what that song means when I sing. They ask me why, if there really is a spirit in my drum. There are some that ask that question, and I'm more than happy to answer them. But right now, the way things are, I get the odd question, but it's, again, I'm lost for words as to how we can push them forward. We can't push them. You're going to kind of take them by the hand if you can and catch up with them. They're too busy being young people. I think that's what it is. But there are some that do ask questions.
Miigwech. I wonder if, Joey, you'd like to comment on that, because you work a lot with youth.
Sure. So, of course, like Neil, I don't have all the answers, as he said. But I think one of the things that he's also talking about is land, too, right? So this idea about if we can get away from the distractions and the cell phones and all of those wonderful tools, they're good, but sometimes they're an added layer of distraction. If we can get away from that, I've seen people, youth, live in urban areas, and once we are able to get them on the land, it's a different rhythm when you get on the land. It's a different way of, you're not part of the clock, right? So 5 o'clock, time to eat. In the bush, you eat when you're hungry, right? So it's those types of things. It's a different type of rhythm, and when it slows down and it's the natural rhythm of Mother Earth, then I think that's where Neil is able to can work with youth in that way. I think also having strong role models. If we as adults look to elders for answers and for guidance, it's the younger generation that are going to see us doing that. So we as adults also have a responsibility. So hopefully that answered Julia's question.
Miigwech, Joey. It's a good segue, because we had another question come in. We've heard from you, and we know that ceremony is really important, especially for mental health, spiritual health, and overall wellness. So what impact has COVID-19 had on ceremony in communities?
That's a big impact because we can't, like I said, it's there are some people, like people myself, will ask people to stay away for a while till this thing has settled down a bit. But again, like I said, we use our what we call, well, I usually call it that anyway. I usually use my ingenuity to let people know that I can do these things from home. If you want me to pray for you from home, but if you want to come and see me at my house, we have to practice that social distancing. Because a couple of weeks ago, I did drumming outside and by my fire, and my neighbor came over, and she sat with me while I sang, but at a distance, and she would ask me questions. So when I invite people to sing with me, not a lot of people will come. Maybe I'll get 2 or 3, which is good for me. I like that. I like a small group, but we kind of have to distance ourselves. Or somebody asked me the other day, well, again, I go back a couple of weeks ago, I was on the boat, actually my first trip to town. She asked me if I could smudge her. And I said to her, well, I try not to do that right now, but so I gave her some instructions and what she needed to do for herself, whether she did it or not, I don't know. But after, because that's when the COVID, I can't even say that word, that virus was at its peak, is when she asked me that. And that's when that fear set in. And I said to her, I'll give you a suggestion instead, I said. And I gave her that suggestion by using cedar to do it for herself. And I gave her that instruction and she said, okay, I'll do that. But whether she did it or not, I don't know. So now that we're at this point in the COVID, we're in, what is it, June? I'm even lost in days now too. So now I could talk to her and I said, okay, now you can come to my house, but at a distance. Because I have to figure things out. If I'm going to smudge somebody, I know I have to figure things out, how to stay back away from everybody. So now that I got my mask, I could probably put on a gown or my house coat backwards and look like a doctor and smudge her, because people are asking me now to smudge. So I try to do the best I can. So now I can invite her over and making sure she's not sick. And so I can begin, but it's, I don't know, that's just the way things are nowadays because we have to distance ourselves. And it's the elders and the teachers who are suggesting that we stay away from each other for now. We can do the ceremonies from a distance, which is good, but we all have to play a major role in making sure that the teachers and our elders and our medicine people are going to be safe so they can continue on with the things that they need to do for the people. Thank you. Miigwech.
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 I'm not sure if anyone else would like to comment on that one.
I would like to comment because I think, you know, what Neil's saying is true, right? And I was thinking also as he was talking I was having a conversation with a traditional resource or knowledge holder, Rob Spade, and he said that all of these things that we do, our pipe ceremonies, our, you know, the building of wigwams, you know, they're all expressions of who we are, right? We are still who we are. These are expressions of what we do to honor that, right? And to ensure that it stays strong and is part of that knowledge transfer. But I always think about that, you know, and, you know, always when I was younger, I used to always have to go out to do full moon ceremonies, or I would have to go somewhere to do a sharing circle. And now I realize I don't have to go anywhere to do those things. I can do those things at home with myself and with my family, right? So I think there's also that connection, and that's, you know, pulling back from what Julia had said about youth, right? Engaging youth in that way too. If you have young children, that it starts at home also. Yeah, so miigwech.
Miigwech, Joey. Just
to touch on that one too, Joey, it's kind of reminded me of something. When my 2 grandchildren were first born, my older ones, Peyton and Avery, before my wife passed away, she said to me to sing to them. And I did. They were like Peyton, the older one, she was still, she hadn't been born yet, but my daughter was pregnant with her, and my wife asked me to sing to her, and I did. And I sang. You could see the movement. It's like, you know, how the baby moves inside the womb and that, and you could see the movement. Oh, she's moving. And I sang to her. And I did, and I sang to Avery, the second oldest, and the same thing happened. So now when they come to visit, when they used to come to visit before this COVID thing, we used to sing together. And now they know actually four of the songs that I carry. And yes, it's very important that we need to get them at a very young age, even before they're born, because they are still fresh. They're not here yet. They're at the doorway of coming from that point to this side. And when they're here, that's when everything happens, because they're still fresh from the Creator. They still remember those teachings from our Creator. They still remember all those things. But if you sing to them, they can hear you, they can see you, they can feel you, and they begin to understand what it is. Who's this guy singing to me? And you know, everybody calls me the Ojibwe Elvis Presley. Thank you very much. But anyway, so we look at it. That's the part that's where we need to grab a hold of these young ones, and I mean that in a respectful way, to bring them forward to learn about these, because they used to call me to the school, and I used to sing to those kids, those young ones, and I think it's senior kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2, and every time I walk by, or they see me, they'd yell my name, "Hi, Neil," as I went by. So that's the connection, is getting them at a very young age and hoping that they move forward with that teaching. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Neil.
Thank you, Joey, for the reminder.
Another question has come in, and I think this one really is for Jen. As you indicated, First Nation communities have been able to keep COVID-19 out of communities for the most part. What could other communities in Canada learn from First Nations?
So, so some of the things that Neil talked about that are happening in the community that he lives in. If you think about that, like the sort of, you know, living in Sudbury, we think we're kind of minimizing our contact with other people because of the measures that have been taken, but it's really not as much of a change as what First Nations have done, the steps that they've taken to keep COVID from spreading. And I think one of the things to learn is sort of that sort of collective effort, that sort of benefit of thinking together and being together and committing to that. And it hasn't been easy. I guess that's the thing. It's not just saying, oh, it's something nice to learn. There's some kind of magic formula. It's really just taking very seriously the limitations on movement, that this virus moves where people move, right? And so just being really really vigilant about that. Now, I also want to acknowledge that this has been hard, right? And that there's more to the COVID pandemic than COVID. And I think that some of the other impacts of limiting our movement, you know, we do need to. So I just want to say, like, you know, I think that there's research that will come, and there's stories that will come, and there's learnings that will come from this wave of a pandemic. If there's another wave, we have to learn from this wave. And some of what we've learned is how to contain spread. But other things that we've learned is how to maintain our spiritual, emotional, mental health while doing these kind of social distancing, having borders that are, you know, sort of, you know, were a bit invisible before, that are now, you know, that have barricades on roads and things like that. So I do think that there's a lot to learn, but I think we really need to, what we need to honor is that sort of commitment and collectivity that First Nations really committed to watching carefully where people go because that's where COVID goes.
Miigwech, Jen. So we've had another question come in, and it's asking, has COVID-19 affected the mental health of First Nation community members? Because, with the closure of borders, has this introduced a sense of isolation to the members who are living in the community?
I have to say yes. I have to say yes, because I hear comments around in my community here on Christian Island regarding that, and they said that the ones who are doing set up the restrictions for us, they said that they get angry with them because they can't seem to go anywhere. It seems like they're stuck. And I go back again to that teaching where he said, find something to do to ease the mind. And I'm going to give you an example for me. Like there was maybe a week ago, I think it was, that it's like everything kind of just started falling apart. I don't know how and why it was happening to me. And I thought to myself, I wish this thing was over. I wish I could go visit my family, my friends, all the people that I've met through the years. And I know my community members here are saying the same thing. And they keep wondering why is it that our relatives can't come from the mainland here to the island? Because right now we're in a residence-only policy right now. No one is allowed here, no non-residents, unless permission is granted. And then you have to write a letter, and then all this. Then all these things start going in through their minds, and then when is this going to stop? When is it? That grumbling in First Nations, but a lot of them are getting angry, and a lot of them are getting stressed because there's things they want to do on the mainland. But then somebody spoke to them. I believe it was on Facebook a while ago, maybe a week ago or so. I can't remember when it was. And she said, remember how it was back in the day. Because back then we were only, the first boat was at 7:30 and everything shut down at 6. There was no movement across to the mainland after that. The schedule was limited, because it was really, for us back then, we had lots to do, and then the older folks would be making quill baskets. They would be making blankets. They would make all these things. But today, and that mental health thing comes into play, and a lot of them are getting frustrated. They're stressed, and there are people that are in the hospitals. They cannot see them because of this virus. What I guess the thing is that we have to follow direction. And if the mind does not see the direction, then where do we go from there? Because I know I have a good friend of mine her and I are the same age. We're 25. And we talk a little bit about those things sometimes. And she says, I'm okay with this. So I said, so am I. I know what I can do. If I get stuck, I go sit in the backyard and start looking at my yard, and then all of a sudden I'm up doing something. And I think some of us have to go back and relearn and help the younger ones who are just below my age to see that through. And but that comment that was made by one of our members said, remember back in the day, it was harder for our people than it is now. Mind you, this disease is making it harder for us, but yeah, I would say that there's a lot of stress and a lot of I don't know if you call it mental anguish, I guess maybe, and for some of my people here, but it's like that all over. But we live on an island, we're here, and hopefully that our people can understand what it is. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Neil. Robin, did you have something you'd like to add?
Miigwech, Neil. Yeah, I think that absolutely this COVID is definitely impacting, the mental wellness, the emotional wellness, the spiritual wellness, the physical wellness. I think that we forget the importance of connection until suddenly we don't have access to that connection. And I don't think that this is something that's only impacting First Nations who live on community. My family all lives on a First Nation, and I live here all by myself in Sudbury. And so my family can't come here. I can't see my family. And it's, I think definitely.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. I'm going to pose the panelists with one final question, and then I'm going to ask if everyone would like to make sort of their final thoughts, and then we'll finish off with Elder H. Neil Moneg doing a song and prayer for us at the end. So is there any way that we can prepare future generations for situations like COVID-19?
Is this a question that you're asking us?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, just give some final thoughts
Okay.
to what we've talked about today, and this is sort of the framing question.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I think, in order to prepare for future generations is that we need to, as Neil had mentioned already, is to talk to elders, right? Those who have been through it already. Also, I think, in order to prepare is to have stories, right? Stories about what's going on now, so people in the future can read about it and know about it, and with compliments from data and all those wonderful things that are strong tools, we want to couple that with also stories, people's words. So yeah, I think it's really important. I think that's how we can prepare and to keep our ceremonies and our families close. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Joey.
I think that, I think part of what I'm really starting to feel is that not only do we need to learn and prepare future generations, we need to learn and prepare ourselves, actually, like for, 6 months from now, a year from now. And so we're going to learn, and we're going to, develop new ways of, look at this, like new ways of interacting. We're hearing from Neil, who's on an island and hasn't been to town more than 4 times in 4 months. So it's, we're learning, and we are going to shift the course of things. This has shifted the course of things in terms of understanding our interactions with each other, with the land, and with past and future generations. But I also just want to emphasize how much we have to learn quickly so that we can better prepare ourselves for next week, 2 months, 6 months, next year, 10 years. We really just need to keep learning.
Miigwech, Jen. Robin or Neil, do you have any final thoughts?
I'll ditto what Jen said.
The virtual smudge.
There it is. See it? That's for all of you.
Miigwech, Neil.
Even the ones on the chat. That's for you also.
I don't have anything else to add, but thank you.
I don't either. I think I'm talked out now.
Miigwech to all the panelists. Thank you so much for sharing with us and for your openness and your readiness to answer the questions that were coming in. And I think that I know I can speak personally that I've learned a lot from all of you, and I'm sure the people who are watching have as well. I'd like to now pass it over to Elder H. Neil Moneg to finish out with a song and a prayer. Miigwech, Neil.
Wow.
Chimigwech, Neil, that was a beautiful song. So, wow, I guess is all I have to say is this has been amazing. We are very fortunate to have partnered with Science North to bring this seminar series to our community. Chimigwech to Julie Moskalik and the science director and the teams that have worked to make this happen seamlessly, including Julia Alick, Renata Brandt, and our moderator today, Emily Curtin. At Laurentian University, we've had a number of people from different departments collaborate behind the scenes. Thank you to our communications team and the people in the research office. Finally, Elder H. Neil Manag. Chimigwech for opening and closing the session in a good way. Miigwech also for your reflections on the impact of COVID-19 on First Nations populations. And finally, to our panelists, Robin, Joy Lynn, and Jennifer. Chimigwech for the work that you are doing. It is critical in keeping our nations and citizens well. I want to acknowledge the complexity of this research and the toll it takes on you and your teams doing this work. It speaks to your resilience and commitment to the wellness of all Indigenous peoples. Miigwech, miigwech, miigwech. So as a reminder, there are still 2 more Let's Talk About COVID-19 seminars to come. We hope to see you next Wednesday, June 17th from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. The topic for this seminar is the importance of health and wellness in a pandemic. So chimigwech and have a good rest of the week.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your knowledge with us. I dare to say this was our